So, Kim, the Mets said they aren't going to chase Jacob deGrom or get into a bidding war for him. But do you think that they need to re-sign deGrom at all costs?
It's hard for me to say this because I'm a big fan of his. Not at all costs. Absolutely not. He started 15 games last year, just 11 this year. Yes, he confounded the Braves in one of those Picassos that he throws, here and there and takes our breath away. But to me, guys, just not enough from deGrom to say we have to do everything we can to keep this guy. I'd like them to keep him, but health is a concern. Durability is a concern. And I didn't love it in the playoffs, or it was against the Braves, when it looked like Buck clearly said, do you have another inning? And clearly that answer was no, because after that sixth, I believe it was, he went to the pen. So not at all costs.
Well, it's hard to know with deGrom because, as you've said, Kim, he hasn't pitched essentially in 2 years, and then you don't know what he's going to want. I mean, if he's not communicating or his team isn't communicating with the Mets, then, yeah, I think that there's some interest in bringing the player back. But as far as what it's going to take to bring him back, hard to say at all costs at this particular point. All right, JJ, you talk about top of the rotation. What should the backup plan be for the Mets in their rotation overall if deGrom chooses to go elsewhere?
Okay, if Jacob deGrom, let's say, is wearing a Texas Rangers uniform next year, I'm looking at two guys. Number one is Carlos Rodon. Carlos Rodon is one of the best pitchers in all of baseball that nobody talks about. His stuff is electric. He had a fantastic season for the San Francisco Giants, and he's young. We're not talking about a guy who's 38, 39, or 35 and 36. Those prime years, those best years ahead of the player are there for a guy like Rodon. So I would make that call. And then if you want to talk about the old relic, if you want to talk about the future Hall of Famer, then you make a call to Justin Verlander, who's a free agent at the end of the year. Verlander just won the World Series with the Astros. Kim, I'm not saying that's my number one choice. But
intriguing.
If deGrom leaves, Rodon, Verlander, that's how I'd approach the rotation. The Mets can do it with their budget.
And they'd probably be able to get Verlander, what the deal that maybe they'd want to give deGrom were a shorter-term deal for higher money as opposed to maybe a 5-year deal. Who knows what deGrom wants? But you could probably get Verlander for 2 years, let's say, I would think at this point.
Well, and it felt like Verlander wanted to come to New York last year. I know he ended up back in Houston. He's not complaining. He's going to win a Cy Young. He ended up winning the World Series. But I don't think he's done. Like, I watched him on that World Series set after they won. He didn't sound like a guy who's going to ride off into the sunset and play a whole lot of golf. He wants to keep winning. He wants to add to that Hall of Fame resume. Maybe it's here in New York.
Yeah, it wouldn't be my first choice, but not a bad consolation prize if, for whatever reason, they can't come to an agreement with deGrom. Let's make the call to the bullpen and welcome in Jim Duquette. All right, Jim, how should the Mets front office approach these negotiations, which seem tricky here with deGrom? Who knows what he and his camp are thinking? How should they approach these negotiations?
I think it's a twofold approach, really. First off, it's a little bit like the Yankees and Judge. Like, you have to make sure that, he doesn't get too far down the road and having discussions with other teams. You want to make sure, because it's a recruiting process for deGrom with those other teams. They're getting to know him. They're trying to sell him on their teams. And that can get alluring to a free agent. So you want to make sure you don't lose contact with deGrom, with the agent. So constant contact communication is, for me, paramount to making sure that he knows that you still want him. That kind of comes with, it's a little bit of an obvious tone, but some teams lose sight of that, and they lose him because he doesn't feel like they were interested there as free agency went. But secondly, to JJ's point, you also have to come up with these other plans. And for me, it's almost like what the Braves did last year with Freddie Freeman. They put a deadline, arbitrary deadline, but they put a deadline on it. And they went out after they couldn't agree, and they went and they traded for Matt Olson, and they gave him a big deal. And then Freddie Freeman was like, what the heck happened? And, his agent, they really didn't negotiate with the Braves and botched the negotiation. I think that, they got to go out to Verlander or Rodon or any of these other guys. Nate Eovaldi's another guy. These are, Eovaldi's maybe not to the level of deGrom, but they can fill their needs in a lot of different ways. They can see if there's a potential trade, impactful type of starting pitcher out there on the marketplace. Right now, it doesn't seem like it, but, Tyler Anderson, who was a great pitcher this year for the Dodgers, he's available. They could fill with 2 or 3 different needs and then see what comes their way. They don't want to get shut out by waiting for deGrom to make an answer. And then he decides to go somewhere else, and they're left there sitting there without, a really good rotation. So I think there's a couple different ways to handle, but that's how I would handle it. I put a deadline at the end and see if you can't push deGrom to make a decision sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think right now the Mets are doing everything correctly here, where they're saying they're prepared to make a substantial offer, but they're also not going to chase around Jacob deGrom here in free agency. You want to be here? Come talk to us. Let us know what you want. You want to go elsewhere? See you later. We'll move on.